Welcome to the Ipsos Politics Talk podcast. My name is Keiran Pedley. Well, we're entering into the summer holidays, the summer break, but politics continues at pace. Rachel Reeves has given a statement talking about a black hole in the books following Labour's election win in July. And there's intense public and political debate in Westminster and beyond about what happens next. What will happen with the public finances at the budget later this year, but also where will the political discussion go? I'm joined, as ever, by two of my favourite people to talk politics with, but just generally too. Holly Day and Cameron Garrett, welcome to you both.
Morning, Keiran.
Hi, Keiran.
It's an enthusiastic welcome from Cameron there. We need more energy, Cameron, please.
You're one of my favourite people too, Keiran.
So convincing.
I say through gritted teeth.
You're contractually obliged to say that. So we should say we're recording this on Friday. So what are we, like 4 weeks after the election?
Trying to work that already, yeah.
Time flies when you're having
fun.
fun.
We're on the 2nd of August.
Yeah, 4 weeks ago, we woke up to, well, I didn't wake up because I hadn't really slept.
We didn't go to sleep.
Yeah, exactly. We whatever we did, there was a Labour government. And we're 4 weeks on now, and it does feel like we're starting to see at least the early stages of the political debate take shape. So we've got our first political monitor out. We're focusing on leader satisfaction ratings, but also what people think of the economy and Rachel Reeves and what happens next. But Cameron, I think the first question that people do ask a lot is about Keir Starmer. Is he having a honeymoon period? What do his first leader satisfaction ratings say as Prime Minister? So what do our current numbers say, and what does that tell us?
Yep, I'm a massive nerd, so I was very excited when there's a new Prime Minister and you get their first satisfaction rating and you can compare all the way back to the 1970s.
It's been once a year for the last few years, isn't it? So it's been quite a common thing.
So the upshot is he's starting with a positive net satisfaction rating. He's on +7. But when you dig into those numbers, you kind of get a very divided public. You've got 37% satisfied, 30% dissatisfied, and around another third saying they don't know. So post-election, you'll usually see don't knows rise. As we change the question slightly from where we've been asking about him as leader of the Labour Party, we're now asking about him as Prime Minister. And the public are a bit more reasonable. They're like, well, he's not been in the job for a long time, so don't know. So you see that rise. So +7, looking at historical comparisons, he's doing better than some of our recent PMs that we've seen coming through. They've all started on minus satisfaction ratings, but that isn't saying much. And when you actually compare back to previous election winners, Cameron was on +31, Blair +60. I mean, what on earth? And even Theresa May, when she took over, was on +35. So better than what we've seen at the minute, but not better than kind of what we've seen more historically. So when we're talking about whether it's a honeymoon, I've decided it's kind of a bit more of a mini moon, where you're not really sure you can afford the honeymoon yet. You're going to go somewhere, kind of it'll be short, see what happens, and hopefully save up for a honeymoon a bit later on.
See what happens. That's a non-committal approach to a honeymoon, that is. I think these numbers don't surprise me, I've got to say, because I think that the general, can we use the word vibe? Let's use the word vibe. The general vibe does seem to be fairly warm, relatively warm feelings towards the new government and Keir Starmer, but certainly not strong approval ratings. I mean, the one that stood out to me, looking at the historic trends, was in a weird way, was Theresa May, like 54% satisfied in her first rating in August of, 2016. So you forget how much of a genuine bounce she had back at, there was a time when she was really, really popular. In some ways, I mean, not that you discount Tony Blair, but in some ways, Tony Blair's ratings were so strong. It's almost like, is that ever going to happen again? It feels kind of unlikely, but definitely sort of warm ratings, but definitely an element of jury out as well. And I think that probably is symptomatic of the result, wasn't it, of the election? Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was literally about to say that. I think it kind of reflects what we saw in the election. And actually, government satisfaction rating is at -21, which isn't in negatives, obviously, -21, but it is an improvement. Under Sunak, we never saw it come above -60, but it's hardly glowing. And again, Cameron on +10, Blair on +37. And actually, it took Tony Blair 2 years for his government to reach net negative satisfaction ratings, and Starmer's starting there. And actually, when you look at all the historical comparisons, Starmer's actually closest to Thatcher. So Thatcher, her first PM rating was +2. Starmer's +7, and Thatcher's government satisfaction rating was -18, and Starmer's on -21. So I'm hoping, I'm sure that's a trend which he's hoping to carry on with Thatcher, looking ahead to future elections.
Starmer as the new Thatcher, that will get people excited on the Twitter sphere and so on. I suppose, Holly, what this sort of says to me a little bit is that to some extent, is what matters is what happens now, right? Like, so how he enters office is one thing, and obviously you want to enter office as popular as possible, so you've got all that goodwill. But I mean, Cameron's compared his ratings to Margaret Thatcher there. Obviously, there's a lot of water under the bridge subsequently for Margaret Thatcher to explain her 3 election victories.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Those historical comparisons. I hadn't quite realised, as you said, kind of the scale of positivity on Theresa May. That one did surprise me. I think Blair, as you said, his ratings were kind of unlike things we've seen before. But that is the last time that we saw kind of a Labour PM coming off the back of a Conservative government. So I guess there is some element of comparison there. I think where Starmer has difficulties is we've consistently seen during his time as leader of the opposition those lukewarm favourability ratings towards him personally, towards the Labour Party as well. And with a majority of the size that he's got, and we've talked about it a lot on this podcast previously, he's ultimately, I think, going to be judged on his delivery and those key policy areas, key missions that he's set out, and particularly things like the economy and the NHS, which we've seen consistently at the top of people's priority lists through our issues index. So maybe that +7 is people giving him slight benefit of the doubt kind of at the moment, and it remains to be seen what will happen to that +7 as he starts to announce policies, as the budget comes through later in the year, as he starts to make announcements and they start to make progress on delivery on public services.
Yeah, there's 2 things I'd probably add there as well. One is that, we can't know this for a while, but obviously these things are relative. So the Conservative Party are having a leadership contest. We don't know who that really is. I mean, it really feels quite wide open in terms of who's going to win that. Maybe we'll come back to that a bit later. But so it's obviously relative. Boris Johnson won a pretty convincing majority on -20 because Jeremy Corbyn was on -44 at the time. So these things, that is relative. But also, I think the important point to say is that no 2 political environments are the same. I mean, the presence of Reform UK in this last election was pretty much decisive, I think, in terms of at least the scale of Labour victory. The fact that Reform were able to take 15% of the vote and take so much votes off the Conservatives. And so, you're in a new environment where you've got 4 parties registering double-digit vote shares at a general election, and that hasn't happened certainly for a while. I'm not entirely sure when that last happened, to be honest, because when UKIP were on the sort of 13-14% mark in 2015, I'm pretty sure Lib Dems were in single digits. And like, maybe the specific symbolism of 4 parties being in double digits isn't that important, but it just sort of goes to show it's a very specific new environment that we're in. And therefore, when we're trying to sort of read the tea leaves about what happens next, there's lots of moving parts, and that's before you even get into sort of Scotland and what do the SNP do from here and that sort of thing. So it's a new era, Cameron, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And Holly, I think you've been looking at kind of some of the challenges that the Labour Party have been setting out that they've faced since they've come into government.
Yes,
Rachel Reeves.
Challenge is one word that Rachel Reeves is probably going to face in terms of the economic environment, I think, and they made that clear throughout the campaign in terms of the scale of the challenge, and have kind of subsequently come out having looked at more of the numbers with this figure of the £22 billion black hole. We've already seen her make announcements earlier this week, or it might have been last week. When it's summer, I'm not entirely sure what month or day it is, but recently she's made recent announcements about...
We're in August, Holly.
It's official, about kind of cutting back on some infrastructure projects, about cutting back on some kind of benefits, so the winter fuel payment to pensioners is being mean tested and things like that. So we're already seeing some of these kind of tough choices being implemented, and that's before the budget's even come across. In terms of Rachel Reeves personally, her first satisfaction rating as Chancellor sits at 34%. And for context, that's kind of mid-table, so similar to where Starmer is, I suppose. She's sitting at a similar level to where a lot of the Tory chancellors of the 1990s were sitting. She's higher than Jeremy Hunt was when he came in, and certainly Kwasi Kwarteng when He briefly came in and then left quite quickly. So in terms of recent chancellors, she's doing quite well, with the exception of Rishi Sunak, interestingly, who was, as we know, a very popular chancellor before he became a very unpopular prime minister. He actually received a highest satisfaction score when he was chancellor of 64%, so almost kind of double where Rachel Reeves is sitting. We know he implemented things during the pandemic in terms of furlough and kind of giving out money to people to help them through the pandemic and things like that, which is why he got those scores. The last Labour Chancellor, so Alistair Darling, reached a peak of 36%, so she sat around about his level. Gordon Brown hit a high of 57%. So that's a lot of percentages, but it basically shows you she's kind of in the middle. She's at an area where we expect chancellors to sit when they come in. We do tend to see a bit of a drop off historically, as I suppose chancellors start to have to make these tough choices, although not as pronounced as we see in the satisfaction scores of prime ministers that sometimes, as we've seen in recent history, fall off a cliff. What she's going to be judged on ultimately is the economy and her tax and spend priorities. And we heard Labour throughout the campaign consistently being challenged on tax and them saying consistently they were not going to raise taxes on working people, which the Conservatives have been challenging them on recently. So it's going to be really interesting when the budget comes up, given she's already made some initial announcements on cuts to certain public services, how the public receive those. Whether they feel let's
pause and go into this a bit, because I think probably the key number with some of that was that with Rachel Reeves is that 40%, 41% say they don't know whether they're satisfied or dissatisfied with their own, which I think is, to Cameron's point, is kind of what you expect from a new government. People are waiting to see what happens. Yeah. But we've said before, they have the people that voted Labour in July have very, very specific expectations about public services and the cost of living. So there is this black hole that Rachel Reeves has announced. It's obviously hotly disputed in Westminster about whether that should have been known about beforehand. I have to say, with some of the pronouncements from the OBR and others, it feels like that debate is probably going to go in Labour's favour, at least in the short term. That would be my suspicion, simply because the Conservative government was so unpopular. 2/3 of the public said it was incompetent. They just lost a landslide defeat. So I don't think the Conservative Party is in a political space where it's likely to win that argument, that in terms of who you trust about that, although trusted politicians is generally pretty weak generally. But Holly, in our latest political monitor, we were looking at what would people want to see in terms of tax and borrowing and public services and things. Do we learn anything from that, do you think, in terms of where this might go and how the public might react?
Yeah, I find this debate fascinating, which is potentially a weird thing for some listeners and viewers to hear about tax. But you kind of the line that politicians give is that they're constantly arguing over who's going to raise taxes, right? No one wants to say they're the people that are going to raise taxes because they think it's going to be unpopular. But when you ask the public if they would be supportive of increasing taxes, specifically with a view to increasing spending on public services, actually more are in support than in opposition. So by 45% to 37%. So there is a space in which politicians can get away with it with the public, where they say they're going to increase taxes, but the public want to see delivery and they want to see investment and they want to see tangible improvements in the public services, particularly in their local areas. I mean, that comes out in all of the qualitative research we do when we talk to people about what they see in their local area. They kind of say they'd be willing to pay a little bit more as long as they can actually see tangible improvements in the things that they use and the things that matter to them. The thing that they're not as keen on is increasing taxes in order to kind of reduce the national debt or to reduce borrowing. I think those things are less tangible to people. And although politicians tell us those things are important, I think for the public, their priority at the moment, given that only 6% of the public tell us that they think public services are improving or have got better in the past 5 years, they want to see tangible improvements in the services that they use and are therefore willing to pay a little bit more, which I think often comes as a surprise to people when we present this kind of data.
Yeah, although I think it probably depends on who's paying those taxes. I mean, before the election, we did have data that suggested the majority of the public thought taxes would go up regardless of who won. So I think that's what reinforces what you're saying, Holly. But yeah, I suppose Cameron, it does depend a bit on. It's all very well what he taxes to go up, but typically that's other people paying it, isn't it?
Yeah, not taxes on you, basically. But I think it's interesting about how like people's assessment of the economy still looks pretty bleak. We've got 2 in 5 saying they reckon it's going to get worse over the next year. But actually, this change of government has slightly changed attitudes to what they expect to happen to public services. So Holly has raised, I think, one of the best stats in this polling, that only 6% think public services have got better. Only 6%, that's 1 in 20. But actually, when you ask... Pardon? Yeah.
I'd like to meet those people.
Yeah. When you ask them now whether they think the government's policies will actually improve public services, it's now gone up to a majority, 52% thinking they will. And that's jumped up from 19% when we last asked in November. So there are these kind of undertones of things are still bad, but kind of glimmers of hope coming through. And as Holly's already spoken about on this podcast, it's up to Starmer and Rachel Reeves now to see how they deliver on that. But there is this kind of expectation for them too on public services.
I think we have to sort of, if we're taking a step back, I mean, like there's a really great piece by Stephen Bush in the Financial Times earlier this week, which was interesting about how basically there's a risk. I think without butchering his line, people should read the article that there was essentially a risk that Rachel Reeves does what most chancellors do when they're facing financial pressure, which is to sort of row back on investment in infrastructure, which is the type of thing that produces economic growth and therefore, that kind of positive circle of investment in public services. And his concluding line was actually whoever wins the Tory leadership could become prime minister sort of 4 or 5 years from now, just because of the volatility of the situation and this need for delivery. And I think we've seen before in 2019 at the most extreme level how if you don't deliver for the people that put you into office, like the Conservatives obviously didn't in lots of different directions, then things can change very quickly in this volatile era that we're in. And Labour will want to see progress on the cost of living and public services to make sure that sort of doesn't happen to them. But at the same time, they do have the majority. We have to remember they do have this landslide majority in Parliament. And I think that the bit that's very hard to poll about, which I keep talking about, but it's very hard to poll about because it's a bit of a counterfactual, is that I do feel that if Labour can project some sense of stability over 2 or 3 years with Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves and the top team there, alongside a sense of progress, then the next general election, it will be quite not easy for them, but there'll be an opportunity to say, look, we're providing stability and progress. You don't want to go back to the chaos of the Conservative Party. And I do think that political stability point is going to be really, really important. Obviously, the Conservatives will want to go sort of in the opposite direction. But let's talk a bit about kind of what we're looking forward to, other than myself looking forward to my holiday. Let's talk about like actual politics.
You stole my line.
Am I the only one about a holiday?
Well, all the podcasts in kind of the 6 months running up to the election, we were all like, please don't let the general election ruin our holidays. And then some of us have been lucky enough to go on some and go on more. So actually it worked out quite well. But I suppose there's other stuff going on.
Life is one big holiday for Holly at the moment. But I've got my first one, get my timings right, because this is going to be going out next Tuesday. So my 2 weeks of holiday is starting on Friday. But yeah, I mean, other than holidays though, start with Cameron because he hasn't got one for a while. What are we looking out for? I mean, because I guess August is typically downtime in politics. But then, maybe not. What do you think, Cameron?
I don't know. When you were just speaking, Keiran, saying that the Labour Party could say you don't want to go back to the Conservative Party, you made me think of Kamala Harris saying we don't want to go back. That's where my Twitter's been flooded with at the minute, just looking at US elections. So obviously very excited for that. But from a UK perspective, I think it's going to be interesting how they start preparing for party conferences in September. I know we're in recess at the minute, and Starmer was obviously differing about whether he actually had this recess. Lots of people were reporting, and I think it's going to be all hands to the pump and kind of trying to set that narrative in September in the build up to his first party conference in government in Liverpool, where I think I'm seeing you there, Holly. Keiran, you coming to Liverpool?
No, I've decided. I've decided that having achieved everything I want to achieve in Liverpool over the years, including my stag do many years ago, there's no need to go back really. So I'm just going to go to Birmingham this year, and that's where all the cool people are going, Cameron. Yeah. So it is what it is. The American election will be important. I think just touch on that briefly. We had some polling out for the Evening Standard. We're looking at who the public want to win and who they think will win, and effectively they're two different things. So they want Kamala Harris to win by, I think it's more than a 2-1 margin. I think I've got the numbers in front of me, but almost by the reverse, they think Donald Trump is going to win.
And that's the British public.
The British public, sorry, I should say, yeah. And they think Donald Trump's going to win. Is it re-election? I'm not sure, but they think he's going to win election. But I think the important point about that is that is more than just, often British interest in American elections gets positioned, certainly online, as like this kind of West Wing bros and sisters sort of like, obsessing about a country that they shouldn't and stuff like that. But I think there are real tangible, potentially really tangible policy implications. America is the most powerful country in the world. Without going into them here, there are obviously, potentially defence and international affairs implications of who wins that election. So, and we know from the past that Labour prime ministers can get into tricky situations depending on how friendly or not they are with US presidents. So, I think actually, like on a serious note, say again.
Sensitively put there.
Yeah, but I mean, on a serious note, though, like I think Keir Starmer's premiership is likely to be fairly different depending on whether Donald Trump or Kamala Harris are the president, sort of from 2025 onwards. So that's obviously important. And I think, the other thing is also important for politics here is the Tory leadership contest. I mean, it's a very long one. We have the 6 candidates now. Our polling doesn't really give any indication, if we're brutally honest, about who would do the best, other than Priti Patel is pretty unpopular, pardon the pun, around half unfavourable from her. That's a legacy, I think, from her time as Home Secretary. But beyond Priti Patel being fairly unpopular, the other candidates are generally not very well known. There's little inclinations in the data, but James Cleverly and Tom Tugendhat may have slightly more appeal towards sort of Liberal Democrat voters than Leave voters, let's say, or something like that. But to be honest, the overwhelming sense, a bit like the Labour government, is that people are just waiting to see. And so, but that clearly is going to matter a great deal to how politics moves in the next couple of years, right? Because it'll all be that contest will all be about why did the Tories lose, what policy direction they take, can they win these reform voters back? And also at a more basic level, just how effective is the new Tory leader going to be at sort of just landing blows on Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves and sort of taking dents out of their popularity. So that's obviously going to be really important too.
Yeah, sorry, we were rounding up and not over in the grenade of the US elections, and we've skated over what Holly's looking forward to. Or have you already packed your?
No, I was about to pivot to Holly. Unlike Cameron, who just forgets Keiran not going to Liverpool and all the rest of it, I don't forget Holly. So Holly.
Well, I was going to say, conference season is obviously something I'm looking forward to because I get to go to both. So Cameron and I are going to come together in Liverpool, and Keiran, you're just going to have to let it be. So there's my point.
Very good.
Aside from that, I'm actually looking forward to. We've got our Unbound Immigration Tracker coming out in the next month, so it'll be coming out at some point in August. We know that August is often kind of a hotspot for channel crossings, so we do see some movement in our numbers. We've been running this tracker since just after the EU referendum, so it started 2015, 2016, and it's the first time we'll be tracking movement on what people think about Keir Starmer, immigration policy, shifts away from Rwanda and things like that. So we've got some new questions on there, which will be really intriguing to see, I think. So looking forward to that, and I think obviously that could become part of the debate of the Conservative leadership campaign, given we know that immigration was a top priority for I nearly said 2019 Conservative voters then, but Conservative voters in general, wherever they're from and wherever they are. So I think that's something that usually crops up over the summer. So I think that's going to give us some really interesting data points looking ahead on one of the other key priorities for both the government and the opposition, and something that they were kind of battling on during the campaign, and we'll give them the first opportunity to have some digs at each other on a different policy area that's not the economy.
You can always rely on Holly for a spectacular Ipsos plug there.
Yeah, and I mean,
and a Beatles pun.
Yeah,
Double
and
a
Beatles
Beatles
pun.
pun.
Come on.
Yeah.
I can go much more niche than that. I'm gonna have to dry my eyes at not going to Liverpool and hope that when we go to Birmingham we can push things forward. That's a reference Cameron almost definitely won't get. I'm hoping Holly will.
His face.
But
Oh,
We'll talk offline. That's all we've got time for this week's Ipsos Politics Talk podcast. Thank you as ever to Holiday, and probably less so to Cameron, frankly, at the moment. But no, seriously, thank you very much. Thank you very much to Cameron. Lots to talk about today. Obviously, lots of things to revisit in the coming weeks. So do stay tuned. If you like what you see or hear, do like, share, tell a friend about us, and so on. But now, thanks for listening, / watching, and we'll speak again soon.